Okay. Hi, can you hear me? Let's make sure this is working before we get started. If you can hear me, please give me like a thumbs up. Hello. Hold on one second. This is my first live, and I do not see that it's going. So one moment. Hi, can you hear me? I'm gonna assume not. If okay, we see you, but you can't hear me. Oh, you can. Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure because my mic is not moving like it was earlier. So great. Yay, I'm glad it's working. So welcome to Ascension Books and Conversations. This is our first live. This is actually like my first live podcast style. So I'm so glad that you're here. And this live might be a little bit longer than what it will usually be on a weekly basis, just because it is our first one. And I kind of want to just get down into the purpose and intention behind this weekly spiritual reading. And also just getting down to what the book is that we will be going over first, and a little bit about the author and the context behind this story before we get started. So I wanted to start off this live stream, these talks, on a story that has to do with Jesus. And for those of you who may not have a Christian background or may not fully understand where this book may come from, if you have not already read the story of Jesus in the Bible, I'm just going to briefly summarize a little bit about his life and in regards to the King James Version of the Bible, which is what I personally learned from through being raised as a Protestant Christian. And so pretty much Jesus' story starts with his birth, and that was already what was such a grand sign to those that already knew of the prophecies that were made in the Old Testament when it came to the coming Messiah at that time. Spirituality and the priests were so heavily involved with the government and the cultures that were a part of that time that everyone could recognize the signs, even if they wanted to ignore it. So they all knew about what the coming of the Messiah would look like, what kind of things would happen if he were present. And when Jesus came into the world, the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that are in the New Testament explain his story and his ministry when he did decide to begin his preaching based on the spiritual text of that time. He was raised in Jerusalem, and he came back to his hometown of Jerusalem to preach. And that's where you see a lot of his stories and a lot of our knowledge in the Christian church today in regards to Jesus. But what a lot of people do also realize when they are reading the New Testament, that there are 18 years of his life that are missing, just disappeared, just don't exist. It starts off with him in his childhood, and his mother Mary had lost him as a child. And when he was found in the temple. And he tells her, "Woman, why would you not know that I am not in my father's house?" Which just indicated that he knew exactly where he needed to be. He knew exactly what kind of teachings he needed to learn in his lifetime in order to create the ministry that he knew was to come in the future. And after she found him, there is this blank space of just nothingness until he is 33 and comes back and starts his ministry, which began what a lot of people practice today as Christianity. So this book that I am presenting to you, that you more than likely will not find in the Christian church, because of some of the stigmas behind the creation of this story, may clash with a lot of beliefs that Christians have. But I do, especially if you are someone who practices Christian faith, I do encourage you to open up your minds, to just listen to this story, to take it in, pray about it, like you have your own connection with God. So just if there is something here that makes sense to you or resonates with you, or maybe even doesn't, and you don't understand or don't believe or it to be of truth, I just ask that you pray on it and that you discern for yourself where this story may actually be able to help you understand Jesus a little bit more as an individual. So the book that we're going to be going over is called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. And it was a book created by a man. His name was Levi. Sorry, I got my notes here. But his name is Levi Dowling, H. Dowling. He died in 1911, and he was an American preacher who authored the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ in 1908. A little bit just background of his life. I just kind of want to go over that briefly so you kind of understand where he's coming from, and then understanding where I'm coming from in terms of wanting to share this story. So he was born in Ohio, and he was a pioneer preacher among the disciples of Christ. He claimed at the age of 13 that in his public debate, he took a negative side against a Presbyterian elder on hell and what hell was. And that led him to preaching at the age of 16 and becoming a pastor of a small church. He also was part of the army. He was a chaplain, and he served in this capacity as a chaplain of the army until the end of the Civil War. Then he began to publish Sunday school literature. So just pretty much, if you want to know more about him, I'm leaving all the resources that I talk about in the description box below. So you can also read more about his life as well. But pretty much he, for a long time, was in the church, very heavily involved in the church. And he also was the author of 2 spiritual healing books. And he taught chemistry, toxicology, physiology, histology, and he lectured on the use of electricity in medicine. And that in itself just shows that he not only saw things from a religious perspective, but also a scientific perspective. And he believed that in some manner there was sensitized plates on which sounds, thoughts were recorded. So he began to study the etheric vibrations and solving the great mysteries of the heavens himself, which I'm assuming he did so because there were so many unanswered questions in the spaces that he was already in. He claims to have spent 40 years in study and silent meditation. And he eventually reached a stage of spiritual consciousness that permitted him to enter the domain of the superfine ethers he had referred to. Thus, in short, he learned how to tap into the Akashic records. If the Akashic records is a term that you are just learning, I would recommend you looking into that yourself, really researching on what those are, and if you are Christian, you might not fully agree with the Akashic records and accessing this space, because in order to do so, you have to astral travel. And some people do believe that astral traveling is a form of divination. And according to some verses in the Bible, they say that divination is a sin, and that is not something that we should be participating in. However, I personally believe that God is source, and source is the source of everything that has ever been created. And even those things that we deem as bad, source is still a part of those things. And source also does its best to meet you where you are at. And many people are not met or are not resonant with a Christian perspective. And I think that's totally okay, because there are so many different people, so many different types of people that live on this planet. And there are so many different expressions of source here that if someone were to receive messages, just like how those messengers and prophets received messages through the Holy Spirit, I do believe that it is possible for the Holy Spirit to speak to us in other ways, even if we don't understand them all the time. So that's just a brief little explanation. So he tapped into the Akashic records, where he said he spent many months transcribing the events he witnessed in what he called the Book of God's Remembrance. And in this, he produced from these meditations what is now considered the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. And that is the book I will be reading to you today. But before I did that, get into that as well, I do, just for the sake of those that want a little bit more proof of astral travel and its presence in the Bible, I did look up some verses where astral travel is present actually in the Bible, or can be seen as being an answer to some of those situations that came to place. So I'm just going to briefly, and I left that link down on the bottom so that you can read a little bit more about those yourself also. But some verses that I came across in the King James Bible, and if you've read it, you probably know these verses, and if you haven't, then I definitely recommend you looking into them yourself. Definitely recommend reading the Bible on your own time, and if you need further understanding, then go find that that understanding by those who do master the Bible. But yeah, just look into it yourself. But pretty much one example of astral travel is through the prophet Elisha. That was before he became Elijah. In 2 Kings 5, 1 through 19, the prophet Elisha is mostly known for his healing of Naam's skin disease. But what happens next with his servant is often overshadowed by that healing situation. And in this verse, it says, "When Naam had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, thought, 'My master has let the Aramean Naaman off too lightly by not accepting from him what he offered. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something out of him.' So Gehazi, Elisha's servant, went after Naam, the person he just healed. When Naam saw someone running after him, he jumped down from the chariot to meet him and said, 'Is everything all right?' He replied, 'Yes, but my master has sent me to say, 2 members of a company of prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing.' Naam said, 'Please accept 2 talents.' He urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing and gave them to 2 of his servants, who carried them in front of Gehazi. When he came to the citadel, he took the bags from them and stored them inside. He dismissed the men and he left. He went in and stood before his master, Elisha. And Elisha said to him, 'Where have you been, Gehazi?' He answered, 'Your servant has not gone anywhere at all.' But he said to him, 'Did I not go with you in spirit when someone left his chariot to meet you? Is this a time to accept money and to accept clothing, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, and male and female slaves?' So from this verse, what you can kind of divulge into a little bit more for yourself is that Elisha said himself, "Did I not go with you in spirit?" And when he went when he went with him in spirit, he is saying here that he saw Naam come off of his chariot to meet with his servant when Elisha was not even physically there. He not only saw Naam come off the chariot from, let's say, a distance, but he also knew what was inside of these bags that were tied up when he went to see him after. That you can just kind of ask yourself, how would he be able to know those things if he was not there in some way or another? That can be one example of astral travel that you find in the Bible. Another one, honestly, if you just look into the story of Elisha, you'll see other examples of those. And some of those examples are in the link I sent below. But the last one I want to use as an example here is of Jesus, Yeshua, seeing Nathanael under the tree. And you'll find this record in John 1:46 to 50. And in it, it says, Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses is the law, and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." Now, the example here of what an astral travel could have taken place was when Yeshua was with Philip in spirit, going with him to go see Nathanael, and he saw him under that fig tree before Philip brought him to Jesus in the physical. And I just wanted to share those examples because it's also an example of how, even though we're told certain practices and certain things are not a part of the Bible or Christianity, when we really dive deep into the books, we really start to see that maybe those things were just demonized, or maybe those things were just placed to make us believe that they're bad in order for us to not be able to tap into our own Christ consciousness. And that's what I believe, and that's why I want to share this book with you today. So pretty much we'll get into the book. I thought I had it pulled up, but I have it up here on my laptop. And so today, because we've already gotten about 20 minutes in, I'm only going to read one chapter and kind of reflect on my own reflections. But the intention of this live is for you to be able to tap into the chat, share your own revelations from the chapter, share any questions that you have, and hopefully as we come together every week, we can create more of a community where we can have those conversations and really discuss and have our own little like Bible study in a way. So I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that you are sticking with me as far as we are now. So to begin, and I just want to say also gratitude to an old friend who shared this story with me, because it really did change my perspectives on a lot of Yeshua's life. So we're going to start with section 1. I'm actually going to find it in my phone because it'll be easier for me to read. It'll take me like 2 seconds. Perfect. I'm hoping to have the physical book so I can show you as well, and it'll be much easier. But each chapter begins with a summary of the section, and then it goes straight into the story. So, the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, transcribed from the Book of God's Remembrance, Akashic Records, by Levi H. Dowling. Section 1, Aleph. Birth and early life of Mary, mother of Jesus. Chapter 1, here is kind of the setup. You'll see chapter 1, and then the summary on the top, and then I'll get into the readings. Palestine, birth of Mary, Joachim's feast. Mary is blessed by the priests, a priest's prophecy. Mary abides in the temple, is betrothed to Joseph. Augustus Caesar reigned and Herod Antipas was ruler of Jerusalem. 3 provinces comprised the land of Palestine: Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. Joachim was a master of the Jewish law, a man of wealth. He lived in Nazareth of Galilee, and Anna of the tribe of Judah was his wife. To them was born a child, a godly female child, and they were glad. And Mary was the name they gave the child. Joachim made a feast in honor of the child, but he invited not the rich, the honored, and the great. He called the poor, the halt, the lame, the blind, and to each one he gave a gift of raiment, food, or other needful thing. He said, "The Lord has given me this wealth. I am his steward by his grace. And if I give not to his children when in need, then he will make this wealth a curse." Now, when the child was 3 years old, her parents took her to Jerusalem, and in the temple she received the blessings of the priests. The high priest was a prophet and a seer, and when he saw the child, he said, "Behold, this child will be the mother of an honored prophet and a master of the law. She shall abide within this holy temple of the Lord." And Mary did abide within the temple of the Lord. And Hillel, chief of the Sanhedrin, taught her all the precepts of the Jews, and she delighted in the law of God. When Mary reached the age of womanhood, she was betrothed to Joseph, son of Jacob, and a carpenter of Nazareth. And Joseph was an upright man and a devoted Essene. And that concludes chapter 1. And I already believe that there's so many things that we can study here together. Whether you are already a Christian who studies the King James Bible, or if this is completely new to you, there are so many things that we can go through together. And I just want to share, let's begin. Well, man, I wish this was like a physical group, but this is a great start. So pretty much, I will also leave in the description box below a map of Judea, or of the land of Palestine at that time. It was Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. And honestly, that map helps me understand a little bit more of where Jesus travels throughout this story, just to better understand the reality of where he was and where he was going. But at this time, that was what Palestine was, and that was where Jerusalem was. And Augustus Caesar was reigning, and Herod was the ruler of Jerusalem. So they had a king, but they also had rulers underneath for each land. And this is where we learn of the birth of Mary. And not only, we'll get into it a little bit later, but Mary and her sister, cousin, Elizabeth. And we learn about them in the Bible too, knowing that Elizabeth has his son. Oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm blanking right now. The one who baptized Jesus, Joseph. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more chapters. I love that the book acknowledges that Mary was born in Palestine and how she a part of the prophecy from the beginning. Exactly. And it's like her life was already made for her. Like there was always prophets at that time who did prophesy over the children that were born. And they also had intention sometimes behind the children that were being born. And her family was a part of God. They already followed the law. They're saying that Joachim was a master of the Jewish law. So he was already godly in his life, in his path. And he birthed Mary, who was a lover of God's law. So she also was very much a prevalent part of Jesus's teaching because she raised him with that law, with that knowledge. And it wasn't just somebody who was participating in the services, but was directly connected to those that were high up in the church, that were part of that space. And so it was like she was meant to be a part of this prophecy. And she was, and it was already called upon on her. And I think that's great. And let's see. Just another thing I want to touch on is the high priest, they say, was a prophet and a seer. And that is another aspect of quote unquote divination that some people may look past. But being a seer means that you're able to visualize those prophecies. You're able to see because God gave those high priests those gifts to see that. And they knew who Mary was, and they blessed her, and they just knew that she was here to birth a child that was going to change the trajectory of life. And that's a big deal. So I have props to anybody that is a seer out here, because if you were condemned for your gifts, like, know that you are given that from source. And the last thing I want to touch on, because this was what stood out to me the most when I first read this chapter, and just know I haven't read this whole book completely. We are reading it together. I read about half of it, and then I was just so ready to share it with everybody. So we're going to read it together. But the last part of this chapter that I really paid attention to was that Joseph was an Essene, Essene. And that is a group at that time who was Jewish, but also like a subgroup of the Jewish community because of their own beliefs. And it stood outside of what traditional Jewish culture was at that time. And one of my favorite things about it was that Joseph was a vegetarian. That was one thing I learned from them. But I will also leave in the description box a little bit more about Essene culture and where Joseph came from, so that you can also understand that Jesus had two parents, one that was heavy in the Jewish law, born in Jerusalem under a high priest, and one who was part of this Essene group who honestly was considered almost a little bit of an outcast to the regular Jewish culture. Thank you for being here with me. I am so glad that we got this started, and trust me, I will not be talking this much. Well, maybe I will, but not be talking as much as when I will be diving more deep into each of these chapters, because I really want you to be able to tap into your own innate knowledge and like pray and like listen to what source is trying to show you with each chapter. The book is there for you to read for yourself. It's free online. So if you want to dive deep into it yourself, please do so. And if you want to come here and share this space with each other every week and dive deep into each chapter together, then please do so. That is why we're here. This is a safe space, open for you to share your perspectives, for us to have these discussions. And yeah, I'm looking forward to coming back together next week. Actually, I want to read one more chapter. We got time. We still got 2 minutes. So, because they do get into Elizabeth, and I just want to share that side of it too, because I do think that this book shares not only Yeshua's story to a heavy extent, but also Joseph the Baptist's story to a heavy extent. So we'll get into section 2. Section 2, birth and infancy of the harbinger and of Jesus. Chapter 2. Zacharias and Elizabeth. Prophetic messages of Gabriel to Zacharias, Elizabeth, and Mary. Birth. I kept saying Joseph, it's John. I'm so sorry, John the Baptist. And I always get when I don't know, actually I never get them mixed up. So that's funny. I just blanked. John the Baptist. Prophecy of Zacharias. Chapter 2. Near Hebron, in the hills of Judah, Zacharias and Elizabeth abode. They were devout and just, and every day they read the law, the prophets, and the Psalms, which told of one to come, strong to redeem, and they were waiting for the king. Now, Zacharias was a priest, and in his turn he led the temple service in Jerusalem. It came to pass, as Zacharias stood before the Lord and burned the incense in the holy place, that Gabriel came and stood before his face. And Zacharias was afraid. He thought that some great evil was about to come upon the Jews. But Gabriel said, O man of God, fear not. I bring to you and all the world a message of goodwill and peace on earth. Behold, the Prince of Peace, the King you seek, will quickly come. Your wife will bear to you a son, a holy son, of whom the prophet wrote, Behold, I send Elijah unto you again before the coming of the Lord. And he will level down the hills and fill the valleys up and pave the way for him who shall redeem. From the beginning of the age, your son has borne the name of John. The mercy of the Lord, his name is John. He will be honored in the sight of God, and he will drink no wine, and from his birth he will be filled with holy breath. And Gabriel stood before Elizabeth as she was in the silence of her home, and told her all the words that he had said to Zacharias in Jerusalem. When he had done the service of his course, the priest went home, and with Elizabeth rejoiced. 5 months passed by, and Gabriel came to Mary in her home in Nazareth and said, Hail Mary, hail, once blessed in the name of God, twice blessed in the name of holy breath, thrice blessed in the name of Christ, for you are worthy and will bear a son who shall be called Emmanuel. His name is Jesus, for he saves his people from their sins. When Joseph's daily task was done, he came, and Mary told him all the words that Gabriel spoke to her. And they rejoiced, for they believed that he, the man of God, had spoken words of truth. And Mary went with haste to tell Elizabeth about the promises of Gabriel. Together they rejoiced. And in the home of Zacharias and Elizabeth did Mary tarry 90 days. Then she returned to Nazareth. To Zacharias and Elizabeth a son was born. And Zacharias said, Most blessed be the name of God, for he has opened up the fount of blessings for his people Israel. His promises are verified, for he has brought to pass the words which holy prophets spoke in olden times. And Zacharias looked upon infant John and said, You shall be called the prophet of the Holy One, and you will go before his face and will prepare his way. And you will give a knowledge of salvation unto Israel, and you will preach the gospel of repentance and the blotting out of sins. Behold, for soon the day star from on high will visit us, to light the way for those who sit within the darkness of shadow land and guide our feet onto the ways of peace. So that is chapter 2, and it is a mouthful, and there is a lot to go over here. But to summarize it from right now, pretty much, Zacharias and Elizabeth. Well, Elizabeth is related to Mary. I can't recall. I believe they were cousins. And Gabriel. So what called out to me first when I first read this actually was the fact that Zacharias was a priest and he led a temple service in Jerusalem. But when he was alone, he lit incense, and the incense brought Gabriel into his space. And I always thought that was interesting, because if you want to talk about like new age practices, let's just start by saying new age is not new, and that a lot of these rituals and a lot of these practices have been done a long time ago. And for him to light the incense on the altar and for Gabriel to appear, some people believe that to be witchcraft, but it's something that they did as a ritual all the time. They did it as a form of worship. And in that form of worship, this priest who was heavily practiced and just in the law of the Jewish people at that time, this is what occurred. And he looked upon this angel and had fear and believed that it was something evil. And I always thought that was something interesting, even when reading the King James Version, was that anytime that an angel appeared to somebody in person, that they were like scary. They were like something that appeared with so much, I don't know, like it gave every human that saw them fear and believed that something was bad. And I always found that to be interesting because the angels of God are physically appearing as fear like a beast in some way. But then we talk about the angels who, like Lucifer, may appear graceful and peaceful and of light, and in reality he was Lucifer. And so it's a beautiful example of, the physical is not always as it appears. So that stood out to me personally. And Gabriel was Archangel Gabriel. If you know about the angels, there were angels and archangels, and archangels are the ones who were the closest to God, I guess you could say, and were a big part of creation, but also a big part of the army of God in a way. And so Gabriel, them knowing who Gabriel was, and him to say he was Gabriel coming to them, they believed his word when he said that. Then they said that John was going to be born. And if you know the story of John the Baptist, he was the one who was preaching before Jesus began to preach. And he spoke on Jesus coming into the physical world at that time and being the light. And when Jesus finally came to him, he knew he was who he was without them even having to speak a word. He already saw him and knew that that was Jesus. And he was already preaching about him before he met him, because that was what was prophesied over his life when he was a child. And I think that's beautiful, to be honest. His parents knew, Elizabeth and Zacharias knew that he was going to pave the way for this prophet. And this prophet was directly in line with their family, Mary, who had the same angel come to her and tell her that Jesus, Emmanuel, was about to be born. And I think that's so wild. So, another thing that stood out to me from this was that pretty much their belief, and they were given their names. But also in the last verse, Gabriel says, "Soon the day star from on high will visit us, to light the way for those who sit within the darkness of the shadow land and guide our feet unto the ways of peace." And I think the term day star is something to be researched, and that would definitely, if you know a little bit more about that specific term, I would definitely love to hear it in the comments, because I believe, from what I know, day star is what a lot of people refer to as Lucifer. So I do kind of want a little bit of a clarification on that. But yeah, we're going to go a little bit deeper next week. So I definitely recommend you going back maybe to this video, listening to it again, going to the link in the description to find the Aquarian Gospel. It's free for you to read for yourself over these chapters and to pray over them, and whatever revelations you receive from that, I pray that you come back here and share what you learned. And thank you again for being here. Have a beautiful Sunday, and I will see you next week. Peace.